of Commerce has announced retaliatory measures against two European Union financial institutions in response to the bloc's sanctions on Chinese firms linked to Russia's war in Ukraine. Beijing has warned the EU to reverse its decision targeting two Chinese banks or face further action. The ministry says the sanctions damage China's legitimate interests and has called on the 27-member bloc to correct its wrongdoings. The EU's 18th round of sanctions announced last month targeted Chinese and Turkish entities allegedly aiding Russia's military complex, as well as an Indian company called Narya Energy, partly owned by Rosneft. We are now joined by Andrew K.P. Leung, who's a China strategist. He joins us live from London. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Can you analyse the tensions, if you can put it, between China and the European Union, especially in regards to Beijing's closeness to Moscow and the problems that it uproots?
The West is always under the impression of the belief that somehow China would give everything on the side of the West against Russia. Not only that China, of course, has refrained from supplying Russia with weapons, very, very careful, walking a thin line, bearing in mind the close economic relationship between China and Russia, but also that increasingly there is a narrative that China needs to do much more. Rather than not supplying China with weapons only, China needs to sever all ties with Russia economically, in spite of the fact that, of course, the two countries, China and Russia, are intertwined, are extremely complementary. Russia being the world's largest exporter of energy and agricultural products, and China being the world's largest customer. But in spite of that, there's the rhetoric in the West, including the European Union, that China needs to do more. China need to not buy Russian oil, not buy Russian products. Well, that, of course, is trembling on China's sovereignty, because these purchases, these economic relationships date back well before the war on Ukraine. So I don't think that China would agree to that. And as a result, just reported the war is not doing, bearing on, increasingly not in favoring the Ukrainians, because Trump is starting down the support of weapons and also money to Ukraine. Let's face it, I mean, the war in Ukraine is a proxy war. It's not entirely driven by Ukraine's own defenses in terms of blood and treasure. But of course, the treasure comes from, most of the money comes from the Western allies and also especially the United States. And then the major supplier of weapons is by the United States and bought by some European nations. But the European nations are increasingly wary of Trump's distancing the relations from the European allies.
Yes.
Closer to Russia. So I think that you can see that this, because of that, the Europeans think that they could impose sanctions, restrictions on China. I think that China is trying to push back.
Andrew, thank you very much for joining us and giving your insight, as always, on the programme.